Hello! Today I'm going to show you how to make this gorgeous silk slip dress with buttons from the side and a split along the leg. You can make an easier version of this dress just by skipping part with buttons and loops. You can wear this dress for special occasions or as an everyday dress even during cold days. My name is Victoria and you can check my channel to see what type of garments we are sewing here and to subscribe if you like. The link for the pattern I purchased and used for this dress I will leave down in the description box. And before we will jump into the sewing process, I would like to mention that you should take a pattern size that fits to your chest measurements, because it is much easier to adjust your pattern in the hip and waist zone. Okay, and now about materials that we will need for this dress. We will need a silky easy drape fabric. I chose a synthetic silk. This dress will have a lining and I will use the same fabric as for a facing layer as for a lining. All in all 3 meters 30 for my size. Then we will need some fusible bias tape like this. We will use it to stabilize the upper edge of our back panel. We will need 21 special buttons that can be covered with the fabric. Recommended size is 7-10 millimeters. At first, I ordered these 9 millimeters buttons, but they are requiring some special hand press. I didn't know that, so I had to order another buttons. These are 13 millimeters in diameter. They are the smallest I could find from this brand. The good thing that there was some special tool already included to cover up buttons. And another option is to buy buttons that are already covered with the fabric. Then we will need thin matching threads. Thin needles, number 60 or 70. I recommend to take microtacks, they are suitable for silk, but thin universal needles can work as well. And it's good to have thin pins for this project. By the way, we will need only a sewing machine to make this dress. Our dress is cut on the bias. It means that we position our pattern pieces at 45 degrees to the edge. Such type of silk dresses have very nice properties, because fabric is a little bit stretchy at 45 degrees and it allows us to use no zipper, no extra darts, and the fabric wrap up the body in a beautiful way. Despite of all of these properties, it requires a little bit more fabric and can be tricky to work with. Here are a few tips. Position your pattern pieces strictly at 45 degrees angle. I use a ruler to measure the distance from the marking line to the edge. Sometimes the silky fabric moves and kind of tries to run away when you cut it with scissors. So I recommend to pin your pattern close to the edge, so it will be easier to cut out the pieces. And don't forget about notch marks. Here we have our front panel and 2 back panels. We need to cut them from the lining material too. Then we have 1 strap to make loops and 2 shoulder straps, and that's all. After you cut out your pieces, please transport them very accurately. Do not hang them, because they can easily deformate. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to fuse our bias tape to the upper edges of the back panels. We are doing this only on the main material. Our bias tape is 1 cm wide, as well as our seam allowances. In the instruction was described to fuse this tape 8 mm from the edge. I was a little bit confused why they decided to fuse the bias tape not from the side of the seam allowance. But I decided just to follow the instruction, and in the end it looks good. Though I have a thin silk, I still couldn't see any imprint on the right side. But you should check first how your fabric reacts to the iron and steam, and to try to fuse a small piece of bias to the offcut. After this we need to make a central back seam. I position my panels right side to the right side, I match all the notch marks, pin the edge, and then I make a hand stitch. I will use this hand stitch method throughout my work, because my fabric is very slippery. I made a straight stitch with my sewing machine, back stitching in the beginning and the end, and we do the same with our lining. After removing my hand stitch, I go to the ironing board. At first I press my seam flat, then I slightly unfold my seam allowances with the tip of the iron. When you work with such a thin material, you should avoid pressing with all the surface of an iron, because your seam allowances, especially thick places, can imprint to the right side. Instead, you can use a trick by using a thick carton in between the fabric and the seam allowances. There will be no imprint on the right side. The next step is to make darts. At first I pinned and then I hand stitched my darts. I start to stitch from the side. I make back stitching at the beginning and go to the top of my dart. I do not make a back stitch in the end. I just leave long threads to tie a knot manually, and then I hide the ends inside of the dart with the help of a needle. Like this, we will receive a smooth top of our darts. And we make all darts on the main material and on the lining. Now we go to the ironing board. At first we press the fold of our dart like this. I do not go further than the top of the dart. Then I need to iron my dart to the top. Do not press with all the surface, go with the tip of an iron. Otherwise the dart can imprint to the right side. Smooth the top of the dart. You can use an ironing board for sleeves, like this, or a special half-sphere hem. I find the last one very comfortable. Now it's time to prepare our shoulder straps and button loops. We have stripes of the fabric, and now we need to press them in half, right side inwards. It will help us to make an accurate stitch later. At first I tried to fold the strap with fingers and follow with an iron, but it ends up not so accurate and you actually can burn your fingers with a steam. So I ended up with such technology. I pinned my edges to the ironing board so nothing can move, covered with a cloth and pressed with an iron. And now I have a crisp, accurate edge. Now we need to make a straight stitch on the sewing machine 3 mm from the edge. At the beginning of our strap, we need to create a wider opening, so that later it could be easier for us to turn our strap inside out. We need to adjust a short length of the stitch, around 2.5 mm. I left long threads, so then later I could use them to turn my straps inside out. I make a back stitch at the beginning and the end. While sewing, I was holding my strap from the back and I was stretching very slightly from the front, so my fold was not sliding while stitching. I will use a darning needle to pull my threads inside out. There are also different tools that can help you with this procedure. I attached my thread tails to the needle and pulled my needle through the wide opening. Our seam allowance is now all encased inside. After this, we need to iron our straps because they are pretty probably will be twisted. I pin my strap to the ironing board so the seam would face one side, and then I nicely iron my straps. And after this, I need to make a special procedure with a longer strap. We need to give it a stretch. The instruction was suggesting to make the strap a little bit wet, pin it in the stretched position to the ironing board, and iron it with steam. Then I cut my longer strap in 21 pieces. There is a mark for the loop length on the pattern, but basically it's 4.5 centimeters. The next step is to attach all these loops to the back detail of the main material. I transferred all the notch marks, and now I need to hand stitch both ends of these loops to the right side of my detail. The hand stitch have to be close to the future side seam and should not tighten the fabric. You can use pins to hold your loop in the position, but I actually end up with a better solution. I used a fold-back clip. Like this, I could hold the clip while sewing, and it was so much more comfortable to control the process. Please note that we have right and wrong side of our loops. Wrong one is where our seam positioned, so we need to face our loops right side to the right side of our back piece. Okay, and now we are attaching our front panel to the back panel. We need to position our pieces right side to the right side. We are matching notch marks, pinning the edge and then making a hand stitch. From one side away to the bottom, and from the side of the loops we have a special point on our hip. It is a place where our split will start. We are doing the same with our lining, just our split will be from the opposite side, as a mirror reflection. To make an accurate stitch over the loops can be a little bit tricky, so make your hand stitch very close to the future seam. Now we need to press our seam allowances with an iron. We unfold them and press first from the wrong side, then from the right side with the tip of an iron. It is a little bit hard to do in the places where our loop's positioned, but the trick with cardboards came in handy. Just take wider cards than I did. The next step is to attach our shoulder straps to the right side of our main layer. We need to hand stitch them close to the future seam. At first I attached only the front of my strap and back I left pinned, so I could wear it and regulate the length. Okay, so after straps were attached, I pull my lining inside, right side to the right side, and make a straight stitch 1 cm from the upper edge. Now we need to make a small cut at the center of the front piece. We cut 2 mm close to the stitch. We make this so we can turn our dress inside out. The next step. We need to stitch our seam allowance to the side of the lining. We make a straight stitch 1-2 mm from our previous seam from the right side of the fabric. We start stitching 1-2 cm from the corner where our front strap starts, and we are going all the way through the back to the other front strap, and then we are making the central part. While I'm stitching, I slightly pull my fabric to the opposite sides and tracking that my seam allowance be from the side of the lining. After this, we need to iron the upper edge. I recommend to make a hand stitch to fix it because main material and lining can slide a little bit. And like this we will have for sure an accurate crisp edge. Iron only the edge, do not press over your hand stitch or seam allowance, because it will imprint on the fabric. So the next thing we need to do is to make our side split. We need to connect our lining to the main fabric, front panel to the front panel and back panel to the back panel. It is actually trickier than it looks at the first sight. Earlier I made like this is wrong, and I end up with a weird loop-looking structure when I was trying to turn around the garment. Okay, so I will show you now what you need to do not to be confused. You just finish your neckline and then you take your split, go from the inside, here will be open. You grab it like this, turn everything around, pin this, hand stitch, and then you make a straight stitch. With a split, there is a pretty much similar procedure as with our upper edge. After we connected our fabric to the lining with a straight stitch, we need to stitch our seam allowance to the side of the lining. Again, we start 1-2 cm from the beginning of the split, and after it's done, we need to iron the edge. Well, for today we give it a break. We need to hang our dress for a night on the hanger or on the mannequin. We are doing that so that our fabric that was cut on bias can deformate overnight, and then we can make a hem in the morning. So, now we can level our dress hem. You can wear it yourself and ask someone to help, or you can use a mannequin. You will need a hard ruler to measure the equal distance from the ground to the wishable length of the dress, all around point by point. After we marked our hemline, we can cut off the rest. Please note that after this, we need to cut off from our lining another 3 mm. It's made so our lining does not peek from the under. To finish my hem, I will use a Moscow seam method. I bend the edge of the fabric and I make a straight stitch 2 mm from the edge. Remaining allowance I cut to 1 mm. I ironed the seam, and now I will flip around the edge and make another straight stitch directly over the previous one. This is how it looks. And now we need to hand stitch the hem of the main fabric to the hem of the lining with a permanent stitch. I was too lazy to make stitch all around, so I just made the beginning, the end, and fixed the points of the side and back seam. So now we will prepare our buttons. If you have buttons with a silicone hand press like me, I will say a few words about how to use them. We take some rests of the fabric. Mine is very thin, so I've used a thin fusible interfacing. I tried with and without, and in my case I like to have a stiffer fabric. Then I cut off a circle with twice bigger diameter than our button. I cover my silicone detail with this piece of fabric with right side to the detail. I center it and push a button lid inside. After this I hide edges of the fabric in the lid. Then I cover it with the second part of the button and I press. And that's all, the button is ready. Now we just need to hand stitch these 21 buttons and our dress is ready. I have to admit that this is one of the most useful garments I ever done. I'm absolutely in love. By the way, I have another good tutorial about cowl neck silk slip dress. It is slightly easier and there I'm using another sewing techniques, so I will pin it down in the description box. For today that's all, and I see you in the next video. Bye!